there's one rule of public speaking. You don't start off with an apology. I'm breaking the rules. I'm sorry not to have been with you this week. But it was common sense, so it's good to use common sense. At least I'm here today, which I might not have been if I'd tried to do more. But I'm hearing some good news about the retreat, especially from some who've been here before, and they seem very happy. So that's good news. The basis of the retreat for the last 10 years has been the theme. It has tied the speakers together. It's given them a focus. And it's avoided them giving old speeches once again. It's a challenge. And so the total has been more than the parts. And I'm told that this year has been not only no exception, but it's been somewhat special. And so instead of having my talk theme-oriented, I thought it might be very valuable to speak on the theme, because in my opinion, it's the essence of the spiritual life. If you get it, you understand the spiritual life. And surely that is one of our great challenges. After all, is there anything that there's been more books written about, more speeches or sermons given on, than on the spiritual life? And yet, who understands it? Who feels it? I've got it. Now I understand what it's all about. Or if we do say it, a month later we're saying something else. So let us explore it together and see if there isn't something extremely simple that a child can understand. In fact, in a slightly different context, Jesus said, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. So where did this year's theme come from? Well, I think you all know that many years ago, when we had been recording, editing, and having Puja Swami Chitanandaji's talks published, we asked ourselves the question, he's not like Gurudev giving rules and regulations and things like that. What's he really teaching us? And we said, well, he talks and talks and talks and talks, but he only says one thing. He only tells us one thing. You are divine. You are divine. It just comes out every second word. Everything is only to tell us that. And Why do we have to be continuously told that? Because no matter how often we're told, we don't really believe it. Many of you from the West will know of a book called A Course of Miracles. I think
Course in Miracles.
Course in Miracles. Now, this woman, it just came out of her spontaneously, and so she dictated it to an associate who typed it all out. And it's a very excellent, it's a scripture. It's a scripture. And so later on, when this book had become very successful, this woman was at a meeting one time, and she was quite high-strung, apparently. And so someone said to her, you know, you dictated this scripture, but you don't represent it. You don't act it. You act quite different. And she says, I know what it says is true, but I don't believe it. So, especially for those of us who have been associated with the Eastern teachings for a number of years, I don't think we doubt the truth of the fundamental of the scriptures, which is simply God alone is. Or, put more interestingly, here in India, Brahman alone is, and then seemingly superfluously, they add the words without a second. Without a second. Brahman alone is without a second. Why do they add the extra words without a second? If he alone is, how can there be a second? Maybe they just like to talk, or maybe they really understood our psychology. And this is the point that I would like to open up for us today and help us to understand, because I think it can be of great benefit to our spiritual life. In fact, maybe ultimately it's a key. It explains why we don't seem to be able to grasp it. It also explains why teachers and spiritual people who are obviously highly evolved can shock us by some of the things they do at times, very often disgracing themselves and their loved ones and their followers, in fact, betraying them. Why? How does that happen, that you can be so highly evolved and do such things? And then finally, if we have been blessed to be in the company of a true saint, which is very rare, what is it about them that is different? Because that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is not to be saintly, but to be a saint. not to be saintly, but to be a saint. And by that definition, most of the so-called saints would be called saintly. A saint is something different. Perhaps we should call them a sage. We have another word for it. And that's what is often done, or jiva mukti. But they're different. They've reached a stage where they can't come down from it. What they know, they never forget it. They've reached the stage where if you're sensitive to it, you know there is something different about them. You may have learned a tremendous amount from a saintly person. They may have moved you greatly. You may deservedly admire them greatly, even worship them. But they don't have that something that a Gurudev or Puja Swami Chitanandaji had. It's a strange quality. Someone was talking about Swami Chitananda the other day, and he was teaching in the West for years, had a very minimum number of followers, especially for the amount of time he spent, as opposed to time in India, where he had thousands of followers and devotees, especially in Orissa, in the eastern part. Thousands. They just flocked to him. As far as they were concerned, he was God. But in the West, there wasn't many. And yet, there's a strange phenomenon in the West. You go places, and someone will say, well, I met a saint one day. It's an occasion of their life, or I just was at a meeting. I saw a saint. I know what a saint looks like. So just his presence, you see, had an impact on people. Just his presence. Whereas a saintly person, they have their impact on us by the good they do, the wise words they share with us, the amount of help they can be. But Swamiji, without doing anything, without saying anything, changed people's lives or gave them something that now I know that. So, what was it? And I think it's associated with the theme of this week's retreat and why it's having an extra impact. It's having an extra impact because in 3 words it tells us the truth of who we are. It goes right to the heart of it, past the words, past the concepts, and goes right into our being, and something we don't know inside is responding. That's the secret. You see, When we say we're seekers after the truth, we have to seek with our minds. And what do minds seek for? They seek for objects. I, the subject, want to know the object. So why we are unsuccessful year after year after year is we're looking for a subject as an object, which it can never be. So it's always going to escape us. We will never find it as an object in a million years. Well, then how can you know the truth? Well, if you can't find it in a positive way, how about a negation? Eliminating things. That's the preferred method here in India. Yeah, neti neti. Not this, not this. I am not the body because I know the body. I'm not the mind, I know the mind. I'm not the intellect, I know the intellect. I'm not the ego. I say my ego. I am not the witness because I'm aware of the witness. What is aware of the witness? And that's just the beginning, that question. That is not the answer. What's the answer? You are right now sitting here. Ramana Maharshi used to say to the people sitting in front of him, you're all realized. They, of course, would argue, you are Bhagwan, not us. You see, that's the problem. You don't believe it. That's the problem. You don't believe it. Why don't you believe it? Why don't we not believe it? Because we're not childlike enough yet. We thought that all our spiritual practices were to make us wise, make us bigger than we are now. What about if it's to eliminate everything else so that we radiate and even discover what we've always been, what the saints see in us? I find it almost impossible to speak about Swamiji. Every time they ask me to do something like that, I say, I can't. But I do have one story I love to tell. When he was on his second world tour, I took him and Swami Vimalananda, who was Nagarajan at that time, on a tour of the interior of British Columbia, Canada. And we stopped one night to visit a family in the interior. And there was a newborn baby on the floor, like India, on the carpet. So as soon as we went into the room, Nagarajan and I, we went to sit down. Swamiji dropped on his knees in front of the baby, He just loved the thing like that. And then he got up with the most beautiful smile on his face. And he said, a newborn child is pure divinity. So if any one of us had been that newborn child, that's what he would have said about us. In fact, if the doctor looking after our birth knew what Swamiji knew, that's what he would have said. Look at this pure divinity that I'm helping to enter this world. Pure divinity. Now, how can it be otherwise if Brahman alone is? If God alone is, it has to be divinity. And if it hasn't been cluttered up with worldly experience, presumably it is pure. And I'm prepared to take Swamiji's word for it, having seen the smile on his face. So I think it's a given. Even, what is it that women especially find so attractive about a newborn child? They can't resist it. I thought, well, maybe it's just the maternal instinct. But where did the maternal instinct come from? It comes from attraction. So it is the pure born, it's the pure divinity that attracts us to all things. Why do we enjoy taking a walk in the woods? Because it's pure divinity with no ego. We respond to divinity. That's what attracts us, because that's what we are. That's what we feel in harmony with. Harmony comes from the same root word as heaven. Heaven means to be in harmony. We want to be in harmony with the world. We want to be in harmony with each other. The way to do it is to recognize our divinity and recognize the divinity in the so-called other. Because the scriptures declare, you see, that God created this world and then entered into it. It's just a way of saying it. When he created the world, all he had was himself. So it was divinity. That he entered into it is to tell us and to remind us that he is here now as the intelligence within, as the knowing within. So when we were going to have the theme for the retreat, it just had to be, you are divine. Because it's part of the celebration of Puja Swamiji's centenary. So you are divine. But then we know how the speakers are, you see, and we know how the human mind works. It's very easy to sit here and say, you are divine. I know all the words, you see. I quote the scriptures, quote the saints. But when I say we are divine, then I've got to commit myself. Otherwise I'm a phony. So I may still be a phony, but at least there's a call to be real, to be genuine. And this is our fundamental problem. We're not real. We're not genuine. Oh, we are relatively speaking. Otherwise, it's not likely we would be here. But to be real in the real sense means that it is our experience that Brahman alone is without a second. Because we are that. And in Gurudev's words, well, I can quote Gurudev. Another beautiful story I love. Gurudev used to have darshan every morning in the office down here. He'd come in the office and he'd sit in the front, and then he'd have all these typists. You may have seen pictures of them typing away letters responding to letters that had been written to him. And people used to come in for darshan. You see, they would come in and sit with Gurudev while he was sitting there. And sometimes he'd offer them a cup of tea or coffee or as a guest. So one day, someone came in, a fellow came in, he sat down, and he finally, when he got a chance, he said, "Gurudev, have you seen God?" And the Gurudev looked at him and said, "Oh, please, bring him a cup of coffee," you see. And so, brought the man a cup of coffee, and he went on with his business, you see. Then at one point, when the coffee was finished, the question had been forgotten, he turned to the man and said, "I see nothing except God." Now get the difference. Why didn't he answer the question? Why didn't he answer the question right away? Because the question was asked from a human point of view. Have you seen God as an object? Gurudev answered him from the point of view of the truth. I see nothing except God. There's no separation. There's no subject-object. There's just God. So we don't stand out as a second seeing God. That's what we're all trying for. That's our fundamental difficulty. We expect that we are going to stay here and suddenly see God, and it can happen. But of course it doesn't last, or usually it doesn't last the same intensity. It's not natural. It's a state. All these experiences we have are states. They're seeing different states of sattva. They're not God. Well, they are God because everything is God. But they're not the goal. The goal is to be just as we are sitting here this morning, only instead of feeling ourselves to be separate, oneness is what we see. Well, we don't even see oneness because oneness suggests something separate. Our natural state is oneness. It's always been our natural state. Our natural state has never been anything else except oneness. And we can discover it if we get into the subtle realms of our own consciousness. We can discover that we don't feel separate. Our mind feels separate. It has likes and dislikes, loves and hates. So it grabs our attention and says, I'm separate. I love that person and I hate that person. All that is created by the mind, and because it chatters away like this, we pay attention to it and forget about the consciousness of the oneness that is present with each one of us here and now, and is what is responding to the theme of oneness. You are divine. We respond to that because it's the truth and because that divinity, that oneness, is here and now as our experience. It's our experience here and now. But we're not paying attention to that experience. We're paying attention to the chattering mind. So depending upon how our mind is, how evolved it is, how sattvic it is, either we're miserable, okay, or we're relatively happy. We may be saintly even, but we're not a saint yet. That's funny. I first met Swamiji. For some reason, I'll never understand, or maybe I will understand sometime. This is back in 1960. He kept telling me, see, I am not like Gurudev yet. I am not like Gurudev yet. And what he always used to say in those days is, when he's giving a lecture, he would say, they say. In other words, he never declared anything on his own authority. Then when I saw him again in the Second World Tour, about 7 or 8 years later, or 10 years later, 9 years I guess it was, I was wondering, would I see a change? And sure enough, I remember the Second World Tour as, it was, and become fully established, he'd say, in that. That was the memory of it. And yet, there was another change too. Because even that was a little up and down. There was a time when he just became like this. He was just steady. That's our goal. That's the you are divine that he wants each one of us to recognize and to realize. So at Navaratri, it's a 9-day celebration. It comes every fall. It's September, October. 3 days are dedicated to the goddess Kali. 3 days to Lakshmi, and 3 days to Saraswati. Kali, she gets rid of the dirt. Lakshmi, she gets rid of the tossing of the mind. And Saraswati, she clears up the confusion in the mind. But then, interestingly enough, there's a 10th day that's outside of time, outside of numbers. Numbers go to 1 to 9. 10. That's Vijay Dasami, the 10th day, the day of victory. So even beyond Saraswati, who pierces the veil so we can see. Kali, she works, I'm thinking, in the heart chakra. Getting us a little above the belly, where we're just all selfish and thinking of our own, what we can eat and drink and get, you see. And you do that, you raise yourself from an animal to a human by employing the universal rule Do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. So if you're born a human being and have decent background, decent parents, that's drilled into you. That's the fundamental. So that's a given for humanity at its present level of evolution. Do unto others as you have others do unto you. For those who have reached a little higher level of evolution, that is not enough. That's halfway there. It's not enough. You've got to find out who you are. You get a lot of happiness when you do unto others as you'd have others do unto you, because by the law of karma, they do. So not only are you rid of the bad feelings about doing bad, but you're in a different world when you're doing good to others and others are doing good to you. And so it's very rich. He's a great provider. There's wealth. Anything can come when you start contacting God. As Swami Krishnananda said, no one can be more prosperous than a devotee of God. But then you still aren't connected in a vital way. So you've got to pierce the veil. You've got to be able to see. You've got to be able to understand and be convinced of the oneness of all things. Not just treat God as an object of worship and as an object of surrender, but you've got to know Him in a vital way. You've got to feel Him in a vital way. And that's what Saraswati does. But still, even that, you're feeling Him in a vital way as a second. You're saying Brahman alone is, you see it, you believe it, you know it. But you're not it. That's the difference. The goal is to become that. Well, we are already at the goal, according to the great teachers, but we become it from our point of view. That which knows Brahman is one, knows everything is one, it drops its subjectivity. It drops its subjectivity. The truth is, it was also always false. It didn't really exist. So you drop that false subjectivity. The whole process has been carried on by you, the divinity. It is not the ego doing anything. The ego is just there recording and pretending to be something. It never was true. The truth about us right now is we are that divinity. Our sadhana, therefore, shouldn't be changed, but the underlying understanding and purpose of our sadhana has to change. I don't even say needs to change or should change. I say it has to change if we want to avoid getting into a rut, if we want to avoid a fall, if we want to keep true, if we want it to be successful. It has to change. We have to recognize, we have to claim, I am that. And it's rather interesting. There's 4 great sentences, Mahavakyas, all based upon that truth that Brahman alone is without a second. The first one Of these four, that's all there is, one from each Veda. First one is consciousness is Brahman. So Brahman is that fundamentally, it's what is aware. Of course, if we're in the West, we would say it's love. But then that's just playing with words for a moment. It's aware. And then the second one is that thou art. But two of the four are the important ones. I am Brahman. And this self is Brahman. So as seekers, it's 25% important to see Brahman as consciousness, as awareness. It's 25% important to hear the truth that we are. But it's 50% responsible, 50% important and our responsibility to claim that truth. We have to claim it. We have to claim it. Otherwise, we'll spend our whole life becoming more and more saintly and never always feel that something is missing. Something is missing. Because it's only when we become that or recognize or say with Gurudev, I see nothing except God. I see nothing except God. It's only then that there'll be that peace in our heart, that there'll be something unique about us. There'll be something about us that radiates divinity in all directions, and we have no idea of its results because we don't know who's responding to it. We have no idea. We keep getting surprised by things. But we know there's no ego there to claim it. We just observe it. We observe it. So if we're frustrated with our spiritual life in any way, if we're finding some peace and something here this week, it's because I'm suggesting that we've been basing the retreat on that ultimate truth. You are divine. That's the truth. That's what we're here as human beings to realize. That's why we come to a retreat like this. To be told, you are divine. To think about it, think about it, think about it. Meditate on it. Consider it. Increase the sattva. Avoid the tamas. Purify. 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 It's just a matter of be good, do good. When people see that slogan or motto of Gurudev's, be good, do good, they say, oh, I know all that. I want the yoga. No, that's the yoga. Be good, do good. Be good, do good, like a little child. And then it's obvious. The truth is obvious. It's there now. It's not something new to attain. It's present right now. We just have to gradually get rid of the things that are not in accordance with it. Could it be simpler? Could we be more blessed? I remember one time I used to study a bit of Krishnamurti. And someone asked him a question. How can anybody understand what you're saying? He says, oh, I don't expect them to. It's not for people who can't understand. Something in me rebelled. I like Krishnamurti, but something rebelled. I said, no, it's got to be available for anybody. For anybody. No one's excluded. There isn't anybody who can't become childlike. And one of the best ways is to grow old, you see. But look at the genius of the Vedic way of life. They didn't condemn this world, the ones that understand. They said, work, manifest for 50 years. The next 50 years, get rid of it all. You're born a human being, but die a divine being. In other words, you're born without the knowledge you are divine. When you die, know it. Become it, you see. So they said, the first aim of life is dharma, righteousness. The final one is moksha. But in between, earn money, enjoy legitimate desires. Live fully. That's the real teaching here. Live fully for 50 years. That's all you're good for anyways. You start to go downhill after 50, whether you want to or not. So go down graciously. And then you find that all the things that you're losing now, and you come to, oh, I can't do this anymore. You just say, thank God. Now I can concentrate because I can still be a child. To the last breath in the body, you can become nothing. To the last breath in the body, you do become nothing. So everything is conspiring because we are all born to realize what we are. Every one of us. No exceptions. Because we all grow older. And there's no exceptions. So let us rejoice and be happy. Let us think of Gurudev and how he said, I see nothing except God. And let's think of Swami Chitanandaji on his centenary, how he, wherever he went, silently, you see, he spread divinity. Let us do the same. May God bless us all. Hari Om Tat Sat.